Hello, I'm Dr. Joel Domingo with City University, and in this video I'm going to cover academic writing in your dissertation. Now, to talk about the dissertation, obviously it is an academic written project, and academic writing in the dissertation has a few components, and I just want to list out three of them here. The first thing is that it includes the background and context in your writing. In other words, why are you writing this idea? Why is it included? And justifying that idea through evidence. Good dissertation style in academic writing uses a higher order writing. It uses the strategies of application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation, and I'll talk about that here in this video. And of course, academic writing in a dissertation applies correct grammar, structure, organization, the way in which writing is patterned, otherwise APA. So there's a lot of tools and helps and resources out there on APA. I won't specifically go over APA, but I want to talk specifically about the importance of that, reiterate that, but talk about more of dissertation style itself. Now, as a quick review, academic writing has clear and formal language, doesn't use slang, it uses good expression, so ain't no shortcuts in the dissertation. Evidence from the experts. It has citations so that your ideas don't sound like opinions. Academic writing addresses a specific question. It's not all over the board and tackles 4 or 5 different concepts that are unrelated. It's focused on one or maybe a few issues. Academic writing has a logical structure, and again, it's grammatically correct per APA. So I want to refer to the APA 7 manual, which we use here at CityU, that informs our writing. Now, I mentioned earlier specific writing strategies, higher order writing strategies, and the first one I want to cover is application. Application, what this is, the strategy is selecting the main ideas and research findings that relate directly or indirectly to the topic you are writing about. So you can think of it in 3 ways here. It's 3 aspects to this. 3 components of application. If you were to write a paragraph that demonstrates this strategy of application in academic writing, what you'd first do is provide the context, the background of the article or the book or the research or whatever. You need to provide why, the rationale you chose it. Step 2 is identify the specific component in the research that resonated and then apply it to the specific situation. Let me give you an example of application. Leaders at XYZ organization were not ready to integrate situational leadership into its culture, etc., etc. In one study on the leadership approach in industry, Washington found that the effectiveness of the situational leadership, etc., etc., when the leaders of XYZ organization used the situational approach, they realized that their teams were not adequately developed, and so on. So you see, I color-coded it here. The first block, leaders at XYZ organization, that's the background. Why are you writing? And then you want to provide the context. That's what you did there. In the blue section, you want to identify the specific component in the research. What did Washington find? Found that the effectiveness of the situational leadership approach, etc. And then the red here is applying the component to your specific situation. When the leaders of this organization used this approach, they realized that is application. Okay, so these 3 components, that's application. Again, get the main ideas, the findings from the research that relate to the topic, and apply that to the situation. That's application. All right, let me get to analysis. Analysis is looking closely at something to identify component parts, patterns, and themes. 3 steps to this. The first is you're going to share the background, cite your source, you're going to break it down into the component parts, and then apply the parts that are relevant to your position. Let me give you an example. Again, looking for parts, patterns, and themes. Leaders at XYZ organization need to evaluate their readiness for coaching. Lou, in a study on coaching, listed 4 characteristics of coaching. A, feedback, B, expectations, C, management, etc., and D, A, B, C, D, okay? His inclusion of coaching being listed as a core competency highlighted the idea that executive management should believe in the idea of coaching. So, in the black, you see you share the background and context, what happened at XYZ organization, and then what was it in the study. You write by breaking down each component, constant feedback, etc., A, B, C, D, and then you apply that. Inclusion of coaching being listed had this impact on executive management. There you go. That is analysis in a nutshell. So that's the second strategy. What's the third strategy? Synthesis. Synthesis is the idea of integrating and combining ideas into a whole. Now, obviously, Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, one of my favorite desserts. When chocolate met peanut butter, magic happened. Well, in synthesis, when one idea meets another and you combine the two, magic happens. That's, in essence, what synthesis is. 3 steps. From the first source, break down the parts. So you're going to analyze that first source. Second source, break down the parts. You're going to analyze part 2. And then you're going to combine these two into a new whole and share how it applies. All right. I won't read this whole thing together, but again, you see the synthesis, introduction, XYZ organization, and then, oh, here's the first researcher. Stark studied effective coaching cultures. Similarly, here's a key word, similarly. Lannister examined coaching culture. Here's the synthesis. Combining these attributes, a coaching culture should align strategically with the organization's other strategic plans. There you go. So there's some tricks in synthesis. Is you see keywords similarly, and then combining these attributes together. You can get away with using these phrases. I suggest finding an academic phrase book because that might help. But synthesis is a fun one because you're going to synthesize ideas together and create something new. Here's some tips, though. You want to synthesize based on themes rather than the source articles. Okay? And then finally, use the main points from the articles throughout the paper. Don't just present articles. I've seen so many dissertations that have researcher 1 said, researcher 2 said, researcher 3 said, researcher 4 said, and it goes so on, but they don't synthesize. So that's great that there's so much research on this, but what does it mean? That's synthesis, and we want to look for that in your dissertation. And finally, the fourth strategy is evaluation. Evaluation is making a judgment about the quality of the established position based on objectively defined criteria. Here's the strategy. 3 steps. Provide the background and overall position, specify the criteria, and then judge the situation based on the criteria. The key there is based on the criteria. And here's an example. Employees at XYZ organization, etc. The employees being coached may be experiencing this scenario. Manzoni explored this stuff in an attempt to correct the problem. The supervisor imposes. So this is great background in terms of what Manzoni did and a little bit of application there, you see. Now, here's the criteria. In the last year, they've noticed one employee's attendance, etc. Given these observations, the soon-to-fail syndrome appears to be occurring between this employee and the supervisor. Here is the statement. This is based on the criteria. So you see the situation, you see the criteria, and finally the judgment based on the criteria. That is writing in evaluation. And our expectation is that you use all 4 styles throughout your dissertation from start to finish. Really, we want to see good analysis, application, synthesis, and evaluation throughout your entire writing. You should be writing like this anyway, but especially in a dissertation. Okay. Let me get to the next part and finish up here. Effective expression in a dissertation. Now, I've been often asked, when do you cite and why should you cite? And you should cite everything, right? Well, what's the reason to cite? There's this idea in academic writing of contributing to this conversation. And what do I mean by the conversation? Well, in research is a conversation of ideas. And the first research, let's say a study happens and then another researcher does another study, and they have this conversation between what happened. And that hopefully those 2 ideas combine, and a new researcher, a third, is going to try something different. That's the research conversation. So whenever you write academically, especially in a dissertation, you're contributing to this conversation about an issue, and you will add to the body of knowledge on that subject. As a scholar, as a doctoral level writer and scholar, you have to evaluate your sources. You have to cite them. Do not just report what you said, but again, how, when, where, why it was said. That's the background. That's the context. I've seen so many dissertations, as I mentioned, just cite and cite and cite with no sort of purpose. So know why you're citing, okay? Don't just take sources you find at face value. Just because it's in print doesn't mean it's beyond critique. Using research means more than just you summarize your findings. You want to utilize the research and include the research in the body of your argument. A big thing I see in dissertations is that after students cite, of course not having an argument in the first place, that's one thing, but remember, you're the writer of the dissertation. You are the author, and you are leveraging and using literature to help your argument. Now, there's an art to this. It's not just combining things and all of a sudden that's your argument. You have your own thesis about why you're doing this, and that's the problem, purpose, etc. And we'll talk about that in the residency experience here. But using the research, you don't want to lose your voice. And so that's critical in here. So instead of reading sources for facts just to insert into your material, you want to approach it as a whole and engage with these ideas and dig down into why do you think that researcher did that or not. Citations are so important because you want to make sure you cite correctly when you cite, and so this chart here goes over when you should cite. If you take any idea from an outside source, generally you should cite it if it's not common knowledge. Okay. In a sentence, when do you cite it? Yes, Domingo found that a student's completion of their dissertation was related to the relationship with their dissertation chair. True statement. I didn't do the research, but just as an example. When should you cite also? You could cite it in the end of a sentence. A factor that contributed to a student's finishing their dissertations was their relationship with their dissertation chair. So these second and third points are different ways of citing that. What I don't want to see, and what we see often, unfortunately, is this thing called stringing references together. Dissertation completed is related to student chair communication. Researcher 1, Researcher 2, Researcher 3, Researcher 4. Okay, that's great, but you want to limit doing that throughout your dissertation. So it's fine to do it here and there, but what you're doing, essentially, you're not synthesizing. I mean, what are the nuances of each researcher? What did they find? What's the common themes, etc.? That's what you want to do. Don't just take a statement and then all of a sudden put research behind it. All right? And another important point is if it's cited in the paragraph, it must have an entry in the reference page. 141, in other words. All right, finding scholarly sources. Those are called sources that are generally found, approved, acknowledged by experts in the field. So you want to consider these type of things. I don't want to make this which should you look at, which should you not look at, but these are some aspects of scholarly sources. Think about who the publisher is. Are they reputable? Are they someone that all of a sudden just started last month? Okay, are they peer reviewed? What type of peers? Who are these people? Are they experts in the field, or are they people on their board, for example? Look at the citation quality. Is the author cited by others? Do others cite this author? And finally, the text, the type of publication. Textbooks aren't considered scholarly per se. Trade journals may or may not be. Now, I've reminded people that a textbook isn't necessarily the best source because a textbook is essentially an author just compiling different ideas and things together. So there are some textbooks that are, some aren't. You just want to be careful. Again, these are just some aspects you want to look at to consider what is a scholarly source. All right. Good paraphrasing. Know the original source and focus on the ideas. Make sure there is a distinction between your voice and the author's source. Use direct quotes sparingly, or direct quotes should be used sparingly. Shorter paraphrases are less likely plagiarized than longer strings of text. Now again, these are good tips that come straight from the APA manual. So again, I want to refer to that. Don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but just remind you that's the resource there for you. All right. Flow of ideas is an important concept here, in that whenever I coach students into writing their dissertation, the linking of ideas is so important that transitioning from one idea to another is more an art than anything else. And what you have on this slide is just a quick method for ensuring that these ideas flow together within a paragraph, let's say. So the first part of your paragraph is your thesis statement. All right, if you start with your position, your claim, if you start with an author, your voice might get lost, so that's important. The second part of a paragraph should be the integration of scholarly research. And here's where you can demonstrate application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation to support your position. And then the third part of the paragraph is the conclusion that supports the positioning statement and has a transition to the next idea. So you could think of your flow of ideas within a paragraph, let's say, as a sandwich. Part 1 is the opening, part 2 is the evidence, and part 3 is the here's what I told you, summary, and then let's transition to the next. Quick and easy method of doing so. Share this with you, and feel free to pause this video and take this down, but there's a thing called a phrase bank that I've seen dissertation students use, which is quite helpful. It's just a way of looking at different phrases like I presented before in the example, similarly or because of this, in spite of, etc. Little phrase tips that you can find throughout that'll help you in your dissertation. All right. One final thing before I conclude is this abstract. And we so often skip the idea of an abstract because it's more of an afterthought. But an abstract essentially is one of the most important things in a dissertation and in research for that matter. In fact, we'll talk about this during the sessions in the residency, but skimming an article, you can get so much of it from an abstract and not worry about reading the entire article if that abstract is written well. Now, here's some components that will help. An abstract, it's a one-paragraph block format, self-contained summary of the most important elements of the paper. Nothing should appear in the abstract that is not included in the body of the paper. Again, it's a synopsis, a summary of the entire work. Generally, it's 150 to 250 words. It provides readers with the central idea and the key points. Again, key points. Not everything about it. What's the gist of it? If you don't have time to read the entire work, if you just read the abstract and it was written well, you pretty much can get the entire work. The abstract should describe and not evaluate. And a quick tip here is the abstract is what you did, not what you intend to do. Often I see abstracts, I'll talk about the research and then we'll go on to the question and then we'll talk about the methods and we'll talk about the analysis without having any important elements or ideas in that work, in that abstract. So remember, what you did, a summary, that's good abstract writing. And we'll talk more about this in the sessions. But I leave you with this. The best dissertation writing tip is nothing will be written by itself if you just sit and wait. Dissertations are, I've said often, an iterative process. And even if you think it's bad, just write it down because you'll continue to craft and mold and shape this work until it's done. Dozens, if not hundreds of times. It's going to be all right. It's iterative. It's keep on writing. If Dory said, keep on swimming in Finding Nemo, I say keep on writing because in the end, you'll get there. All right? Thank you. I look forward to being with you on this journey.